Dr. Rowan Hayes adjusted the magnetic field modulator, the air in the subterranean lab beneath Edinburgh University crackling with an almost palpable energy. She was 34, her brilliance eclipsed only by her relentless obsession, the residual magnetic signatures of the past. Her project, codenamed Kronos, wasn't about time travel, merely detection. She sought to map the ancient geomagnetism of the Scottish Highlands, believing that massive temporal stresses left measurable echoes in the local stone. Today was the culmination, the full-power pulse test. A low, guttural thrum vibrated through the foundation, deeper than sound, resonating within the bones. The main induction coil, a colossal ring of copper and superconducting wire, began to glow with an eerie, bluish-white light. Rowan's assistant, a nervous grad student named Ben, checked the chronometers. "Reading stability at 98, 7%, Dr. Hayes," he stammered, his eyes wide. Rowan ignored him, her gaze fixed on the anomaly detector. The needle wasn't just spiking, it was thrashing wildly, registering an impossibility, a full, complex magnetic signature from 1790, present right here, right now. It was impossible, a phantom echo of the Earth's own ancient memory. "Increase the primary flux," she ordered, her voice tight with adrenaline. "We're hitting resonance. Push it, Ben. Push it." Ben hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. "Dr. Hayes, the safety protocols are—" "Damn the protocols, Ben. This is it. This is the core data." Rowan slammed her palm down on the console, overriding the safety locks herself. The coil screamed, the bluish light intensifying, transforming into a violent, blinding amber. The air turned heavy, tasting of ozone and something sharper, like iron and cold mountain water. A high-pitched, crystalline shriek tore through the lab, and the entire world seemed to warp, the steel walls shimmering like heat haze. Ben's frightened cry was swallowed by the sudden, violent silence. The floor beneath Rowan vanished. One moment, she was standing in the heart of the 21st century's most advanced physics lab. The next, she was falling onto cold, damp earth. The sharp scent of pine needles and damp wool assaulting her senses. The air was impossibly thick, a heavy, cold mist clinging to everything, muffling sound and swallowing light. It tasted of loch water and ancient stone. The light was a uniform, relentless grey, suggesting either dawn or deep afternoon, eternally veiled by low-hanging clouds. She lay still for a moment, gasping, her lungs protesting the sudden change in atmosphere. The ambient noise was different, no distant traffic hum, no drone of ventilation, only the soughing of the wind through trees and the drip of moisture from heavy boughs, and the faint, steady trickle of a nearby mountain burn. Every surface felt unforgiving. The ground beneath her hands was composed of rough, sharp schist and tangled roots. A quick inventory revealed her jeans, hiking boots and thermal top were soaked, but intact. Crucially, the small custom-made magnetic field sensor she wore around her wrist, a piece of miniaturized Kronos tech, was still pulsing weakly, its internal battery draining fast. She struggled to her feet, the ground uneven beneath her. She stumbled over clumps of wet purple heather, the stiff blooms brushing against her modern fabric. The mist was so dense she could barely see her hand in front of her face. Where was she? Not the lab, not even the outside world she knew. This felt older, wilder, untamed. She cautiously moved forward, her fingers trailing along the wet bark of an ancient tree, desperately seeking a landmark, a sign of civilization, anything familiar. The disorientation was crippling. She had sought an echo. Instead, she had become a participant. She had jumped. A low groan, followed by the clatter of stone, sliced through the quiet fog. Rowan froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She crouched low, peering into the swirling grey. A shadow detached itself from the gloom, large and imposing, then collapsed. Cautiously, she moved closer, her scientist's curiosity battling her survival instinct. The shadow resolved itself into a man, his face grimacing in pain, his shoulder slick with dark, fresh blood. He was dressed in rough, dark wool, a heavy plaid draped over one shoulder, and thick leather boots. A claymore lay abandoned a few feet away, its hilt caked in mud. He was handsome in a wild, rugged way, strong jaw, high cheekbones, dark hair plastered to his forehead by the mist. He looked like he'd stepped straight out of a historical epic, a rebel, a fighter. And he was hurt badly. "Stay back," he growled, his voice rough and laced with a thick, unfamiliar accent. He tried to reach for the abandoned sword, but the movement was agonizing and he let out a sharp hiss of pain. Rowan took another step closer, holding up her hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm a doctor, a scientist. I can help with that wound." She knelt beside him, ignoring his suspicious glare. His eyes, the color of the granite beneath the heather, were narrowed, assessing her strange, flexible clothing, her short, practical hair, and the peculiar lack of a bonnet or skirt. "A doctor," he scoffed, his breath ragged. "And why are you dressed for bathing in the middle of a Highland storm, lass?" "It's complicated," she whispered, already examining the wound. It was a deep slash across the deltoid, not a gunshot, but certainly caused by a blade, a musket bayonet perhaps. The bleeding was profuse. She quickly ripped a long strip from the sleeve of her thermal top, ignoring the cold. "I need to stop the blood. If you want to survive, you will not move. I am Rowan." He watched her with grudging admiration as she deftly cleaned the wound with rainwater, scooped from a broad leaf, and bound it tightly with the makeshift bandage. The pressure staunched the flow almost immediately. "Lachlan," he murmured, the name sounding like the wind over stone. "Lachlan MacLeod, and I was not asking to survive. I was asking to be left to die in peace." "Tough luck," Rowan replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "The universe just delivered me, apparently, to save your stubborn Scottish life." For the next week, the dense, enveloping mist became Rowan's sanctuary and her prison. It was the kind of cold that seemed to sink into the very marrow of her bones, a deep, pervasive dampness that no amount of fire could fully dispel. She had to believe the magnetic field anomaly that brought her here was still actively holding her in this time. It acted as a temporal buffer, a localized distortion, explaining why no one seemed to question her impossible clothing or lack of a proper language accent too closely. They simply assumed she was a strange traveler from the continent or a remote island, a convenient misunderstanding fostered by the pervasive gloom. Lachlan, too weak to move far, led her to a small hidden hunter's hut nestled into a craggy hillside, undetectable unless one knew exactly where to look. It was rough, stone-walled, the chinks filled with mud and moss, designed to blend seamlessly with the granite landscape. It smelled strongly of peat, a comforting, earthy scent, but it was dry and had a small, functional hearth. Outside, the world was a palette of muted greens and browns, the rust red of bracken, the dark emerald of pine, all veiled by the omnipresent, bone-chilling fog. Rowan nursed him with the meager supplies he possessed, some dried venison, oats, and potent illicit whiskey, which she used sparingly as a disinfectant. She relied on her scientific knowledge: clean water, nutrition, rest, and preventing infection. She meticulously monitored his fever, the lack of modern antibiotics a terrifying reality. As his pain subsided and strength returned, the suspicion in his eyes was replaced by a deep, searching curiosity. He watched her every move, mesmerized by her competence and the strange intensity in her eyes. "You are no doctor of the king's court," he declared one evening, watching her stir a pot of boiling water over the fire. "You speak of things I do not understand, of germs and magnetic fields, like a witch speaking incantations." Rowan smiled sadly. "Perhaps I am, Lachlan, a witch who traded a laboratory for a fire pit." She still hadn't told him the whole truth. How could she? "I am 250 years in your future, here by a freak physics accident. It would sound like madness." She kept the truth locked away, an impossible barrier between them. But the barrier was thin, easily breached by the shared intimacy of survival. They spoke for hours, of his fight against the repressive English laws, his dream of a free Scotland, and the constant fear of capture that shadowed his days. He in turn learned about her world, though she spoke vaguely, of flying machines, instant communication across oceans, and cities made of glass. He listened, fascinated, sometimes laughing at the absurdity, sometimes gazing at her with a profound melancholy, recognizing a soul that carried an immense, unspoken burden. The romance began not with a touch but with a gaze, One night, the fire low, the wind howling outside like a lost spirit, Lachlan caught her eye. Rowan was mending his plaid with the precision of a trained surgeon, utterly focused. He reached out and gently took the fabric from her hands, his touch warm against her cold fingers. "Rowan," he murmured, the name a soft caress on his tongue. "You are real, yet you feel like a phantom in my life, a beautiful dream before the dawn." He shifted closer, the heat of his body radiating against hers, the rough texture of his skin a stark contrast to her own modern softness. Rowan leaned into him unconsciously, breathing in the scent of peat smoke, leather, and his clean, masculine warmth. "Lachlan," Rowan whispered back, the sound barely audible. "I am too real. That is the trouble." There was no need for further words, only the overwhelming gravity of two lonely souls colliding across centuries. He cupped her face in his broad, calloused hand, his thumb tracing the sharp line of her jaw. His kiss was possessive, desperate, a thirsty man drinking from an unknown spring. It was a kiss that tasted of the Highlands, of danger and freedom, of damp earth and the fierce, protective love he held for his country, and now for her. Rowan met his passion with an equal, consuming intensity. Every touch was an act of rebellion against the logic of time, against the impossible choice she knew she would eventually face. The intimacy was a reckless, beautiful consumption. They were two brief sparks in the vast, enduring darkness of time, burning only for each other. The nights that followed were a fervent, necessary escape from reality. The small stone hut became their universe, bordered by the eternal isolating mist. Lachlan's desire for her was palpable, an elemental force that mirrored the wildness outside. He worshipped her difference, the smooth lines of her body under the strange, flexible fabric, the fierce intelligence that shone in her eyes. One cold dawn, Rowan woke to the sight of him watching her, his eyes blazing with an emotion so raw it made her breath catch. He moved to her, not quickly, but with a deliberate, slow grace that promised both tenderness and ownership. His hands, strong and scarred, moved over her body, seeking and finding all the places she had kept hidden, all the parts of herself that the laboratory had starved. The rough wool of his kilt scratched against her skin, the sensation a grounding anchor in the dizzying reality of their situation. She felt the ancient, unstoppable rhythm of life in his touch, the confirmation that here, now, in 1790, she was profoundly alive, more than just an observer of phenomena. The eroticism was in the complete surrender to the moment, the knowledge that this connection transcended every rule of physics and society. She learned the landscape of his body, the hard, corded muscles of his arms, the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart beneath her hand. Their union was a silent, whispered vow of belonging, an act that defined their impossible fate. She was the woman from the future, but in his arms she belonged only to the past. And he, the rebel fighting for a lost cause, found his future anchored in her. The passion was a dangerous tide, threatening to wash away the scientific foundation of her life, leaving only the wreckage of an impossible love. Rowan buried her face against his neck, inhaling the intoxicating scent of him, letting the warmth of his body chase away the cold terror of her situation. She felt his lips on her ear, murmuring ancient Gaelic endearments she didn't understand but felt deep in her soul. He was her history, and she was his impossible mystery, and in the space between them, the world faded to nothing. The fragile peace shattered with the clarity of a winter morning. 3 weeks after her arrival, the thick fog lifted as suddenly as it had descended, revealing a stunning, if perilous, landscape of rolling, heather-covered hills and distant snow-capped peaks. The lifting of the mist felt like the peeling away of the temporal shield. Rowan's wrist sensor, silent for days, began to flicker violently, its residual power spiking into the red zone. The local geomagnetism was shifting rapidly, indicating a massive, localized flux event, the same conditions that had brought her here. She realized with a sickening lurch of the stomach that the window was opening again. Her temporary stay was ending. "It's time," Rowan whispered, staring at the sensor readout. "The field is changing. I can go back." Lachlan, who was preparing to leave the hut to scout for supplies, stopped dead, his broad back to her. He was fastening the belt of his broadsword, a picture of rugged, historical masculinity. "Go back where, Rowan?" His voice was dangerously calm. Rowan walked to him, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The time for half-truths was over. "Lachlan, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to believe me. I am not from the colonies. I am not from this century. I am from the year 2050. I am a physicist. I was testing a device, a machine that measures time's shadows, and I accidentally stepped into one." He turned, his gaze heavy, dark, and utterly disbelieving. "This is a cruel jest, lass. You speak of the future, of 2050. It is madness." "I know it sounds like it," she pleaded, grabbing his hand and placing it on her wrist over the tiny glowing sensor. "But feel this. This shouldn't exist. This is the truth. This magnetic signature is my lifeline. When it peaks, I can reverse the jump. I can go home." Lachlan looked down at the tiny, incomprehensible piece of metal and glass on her wrist, then back at her frantic, tear-filled eyes. He didn't understand the science, but he understood the desperation, the absolute cold conviction in her voice. And he understood that he was about to lose her. "And what of us?" he asked, the question a heavy weight in the air. "What of what we have shared in this misty hell, Rowan? Was that a scientific curiosity too? A temporary pleasure before you return to your flying machines?" His hurt was a physical blow to her. "No, never. That's the impossible choice, Lachlan. The choice between my life, my world, and you. I don't know what to do." Before they could fully grapple with the magnitude of her confession, fate intervened with brutal efficiency. A shrill, sharp whistle cut through the crisp morning air, followed by the distinctive rhythmic tramp of boots. Redcoats. They had found the hut. Lachlan's face hardened instantly, the loving man replaced by the fierce, cornered rebel. "They're closer than I thought. They must have followed the trail I made last night." He drew his claymore, the steel whispering as it left the sheath. "Stay behind me, Rowan. When I tell you to run, you run." He moved to the small, thick wooden door, preparing to meet the assault, outnumbered and still weakened from his injury. "No, Lachlan, listen." Rowan grabbed his arm, pulling him back violently. "We don't have time for this fight. The peak is now. I can't tell you how, but if you come with me, if you trust me, I can take you out of this time, out of this danger, into a place where they will never find you, a future where Scotland is free, where you can live without hiding." He stared at her, the impossible choice laid bare: face certain death or capture, or step into the ultimate unknown, into a future his mind couldn't even grasp, with the woman who was his destiny. The door splintered inward under a violent kick. 3 redcoats filled the small doorway, muskets leveled. "Lachlan MacLeod, surrender now!" Lachlan hesitated for only a fraction of a second, his warrior's instinct screaming for a fight, his lover's heart choosing the impossible leap. He looked at Rowan, his eyes blazing with a trust that spanned centuries. "Take me, witch!" he roared, throwing down his claymore with a defiant clang. "If this is my destiny, then let us face it together." Rowan didn't waste a moment. She grabbed the metal hilt of his dropped sword, using the cold iron as an impromptu conductor. Holding Lachlan's hand tightly, she focused every ounce of her scientific will, pouring the remaining residual energy from the miniaturized sensor into the ancient blade, creating a feedback loop with the natural magnetic spike. The ambient noise in the air began to hum, the deep guttural thrum she knew so well from the lab, but amplified by the surrounding stone and the cold, mineral-rich earth. The air around them began to haze, shimmering violently like glass in a furnace. The redcoats stood frozen, their mouths agape, unable to comprehend the impossible phenomenon unfolding before them. Their shout of alarm was cut short as the amber light returned, blinding and total, enveloping Rowan and Lachlan in a violent vortex of energy. The feeling was like being pulled apart and instantly reassembled, a million years compressed into a single, agonizing second. The transition was instantaneous. The roar of the wind was replaced by the muffled silence of an insulated room, the smell of peat smoke by sterile air and ionized copper. They landed hard on a cold tiled floor. The light was harsh fluorescent, too bright, too clinical. They were back in the lab. The colossal induction coil loomed over them, now dark and inert. The door burst open and Ben, the grad student, rushed in, pale and trembling. "Dr. Hayes, the power surge. You vanished. For 2 minutes. It was a localized temporal singularity. What in the... Who is he?" He stopped, staring wide-eyed at Lachlan, who was wearing 18th century clothing, his hand still tightly locked in Rowan's. Lachlan, in turn, stared at the site of the lab, the impossible machines, the smooth, unblemished walls, the computer screens glowing with intricate alien symbols. His breath hitched in his throat. "By the saints," he whispered, his voice thick with shock. Rowan ignored Ben, ignored the entire 21st century waiting to reclaim her. She looked at Lachlan, seeing the terror and the profound faith in his eyes. "Welcome to 2050, my love," she said, her voice shaking with relief and triumph. "We made it." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of impossible adjustments, yet filled with profound, deepening joy. Rowan shielded Lachlan completely, bringing him into her modern life slowly. He was introduced as an exceptionally secluded Highland researcher, a convenient cover story that explained his peculiar speech and lack of familiarity with modern amenities. She taught him the basics of her world, how to use a shower, how to drive, a horrifying experience for him, and the infinite comfort of central heating. But she learned just as much from him. He brought a fierce, simple integrity to her complex life. His passion for freedom and his powerful, unquestioning love were anchors in the dizzying technological chaos of her era. He adapted with a resilience that amazed her, his rebel spirit finding new battles, learning to navigate the internet, understanding modern politics and marveling at the peace and prosperity he had once fought and almost died for. He never stopped being the man of the mists, but his heart now belonged firmly in the future, with her. Rowan secured a future for them both. The Kronos project was shut down, deemed too dangerous, but she used the data she had instinctively collected to write a groundbreaking thesis, securing her future and her financial means. She chose to keep the time travel secret, their secret, a bond stronger than any physical law. Their happy ending was a quiet domestic revolution, two souls from impossible different eras, now simply sharing a quiet flat overlooking the Castle Rock, the mist occasionally rolling in over the city, a gentle reminder of the impossible journey that had brought them together. Lachlan found peace in Rowan's presence, his hand always seeking hers. He was safe, free, and profoundly loved. Rowan, the brilliant scientist, had not only found the magnetic echoes of the past, but had brought the finest part of that past forward to be her future. Their love story, born of a scientific anomaly and the mist-shrouded hills of 1790, proved that destiny, when it called, would always choose the impossible path. If you love this story and want to hear more like it, please hit that subscribe button. It truly means the world to us and helps us grow. And hey, while you're at it, let's aim for 50 likes on this video. Help us smash that goal.